Hello again. Welcome to Teaching Through the Bible as we rapidly come to a close on the book of Exodus. We just got this and one more lesson afterward, so we're really close to the end here. And some of that has to do with a lot of repetition in the later chapters. We'll get to that next time. This time we are picking up right where we left off. We were in chapter 34 on the 28th verse, and where it ends by mentioning the 10 words, or as it's translated, the 10 commandments. So there is a verse, though, right before that I want to address, just because it has a lot of people scratching their heads, and it just seems like a very strange verse, and so I just want to address that real quick. That is verse 26. The best of the first fruits of your ground you shall bring to the house of Yahweh your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. That just seems kind of out of the blue in some ways. Like, what is the significance of that? And actually, for many Jewish people, that's actually something that to them says, oh, well, you can't eat meat and dairy products together. So I one time knew a guy who he wouldn't have, for example, like they couldn't have a bacon, egg, and cheese, I guess, because you can't have pork anyways, but maybe like a chicken, egg, and cheese sandwich. You can't have the meat and the cheese together. So that's a verse they get that from. For a lot of other people, it's just something where you're just like, what's going on here? Well, so a long time, this may have been even more confusing, but we've seen some archaeological evidence that this seems to actually be essentially kind of a ritual that many other groups of people did. So now that we have that information, it seems that we can kind of put these two together and say, oh, what's going on is he's saying don't do these rituals of these other people. Don't worship their gods, essentially, is what that's getting at. This is the way that the other groups of people worship their gods. I don't want you doing that. And that's actually part of, we'll see in here about tattoos as well. They said don't do that. And why were people doing that? They were doing that, they were cutting themselves, they were doing all sorts of things as ways of either worshiping their gods, trying to get the attention of their gods. It was all related to their religious activities. And God's saying, no, you're not going to be part of that. You're going to do this. You're going to be separate from them. And we'll talk a lot more about that a few lessons from now in Leviticus. But that's probably where that verse is getting at. So I just wanted to address that real quick because I definitely was confused about that when I was younger, and I'm sure many other people, as you read through that, if you see that verse, you're like, what is going on here? Why is this significant? That's likely what it is. It's probably part of some kind of pagan ritual or festival. But moving on from there, we have the next thing coming up is the shining face of Moses, how his face, when he comes down from talking to God, when he comes out of the tent from talking to God, he has his face is shining, and so this is something that's actually even mentioned in the New Testament as well. Paul references this, and so we're going to talk about this next. I have drawn up here this kind of outline of Exodus. Probably should have done that earlier, but hopefully this will help you see where we're at, how it works with everything else. We've got those first 18 chapters. That is getting out of Egypt. So that is the Exodus, as it were. And then you have chapter 19 is kind of setting everything up. Maybe you could even put chapter 18 in there as that's where all of these other leaders are put in places of judgment to be able to make decisions as far as when you have two people at odds with each other, what's the correct way to go about things. They have to go to one of them. Instead of going straight to Moses, they go to them. It's kind of like a lower court of judging and making that determination. So that could maybe even be in the setup there, preparing for the law. Then you get the law, and you get not only the moral law, but you get a number of other case laws that are, remember we talked about moral law, ceremonial law, and civil law. So you got that moral law, and then we don't see any ceremonial law at that point, but we got some civil laws that come after that in the Book of the Covenant that ends at the end of chapter 23. Then you actually have the covenant. You actually have this, God's people and God making a covenant together. And so after that, Moses goes up the mountain, up Mount Sinai, and God says to him, here's some more instructions. A lot of this has to do with the tabernacle, with this place where God's presence will dwell. And he gives the 2 stone tablets, and Moses goes back down. And of course, he sees, they've already broken that first command. Certainly, even if they are worshiping the true God in the very wrong way, they're certainly breaking this command of making an image of God, if that is what they're doing. If they're saying, all right, well, this is Yahweh, and we're going to make an image of him. Okay, well, you can't do that. You're not allowed to make images. You're not supposed to worship an image. So the stones are broken. The tablets are destroyed. This shows this breaking of the covenant symbolically. That's what has already actually happened, and now you have the symbolic representation of what has happened. And then last time we talked about Moses interceding for the people. We talked about how Moses has to kind of stand in the gap. Like, you have God and you have his people, and they've broken the covenant and they should be judged, and Moses is kind of in the middle there as a mediator. And so not only does he mediate their not being destroyed, because God could totally destroy them, because we had that in that initial covenant back in chapter 24, where they had blood thrown on them, there was blood thrown on the altar, and it was part of this promise, like, we're going to follow you, and otherwise may we just be dead. And so he could have done that. They agreed to that already. But not only did he not, he allows Moses to go back up the mountain and gives him a new set of stone tablets to represent kind of the recreation of the covenant. Like, he's reinstituting it. He's giving them another set of stone tablets. They get to do this again, and then that's about where we're at right now, as the covenant is renewed. And he says, actually 34:10, he says, "Behold, I am making a covenant. Before all your people I will do marvels, such as not being created in all the earth or in any nation, and all the people among whom you are shall see the work of Yahweh, for it is an awesome thing that I will do with you." So God is reinstituting this covenant, which is an amazing thing. This is clearly not something he has to do. He's already made the agreement. They've already failed the agreement, and he does it again. So that's just amazing, what he's willing to do for his people. And we have Moses here, who is being that guy that goes between God and the people. And it says in verse 29 of chapter 34, which is where we are today, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, so those have the 10 words on them, as he came down from the mountain, Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone, because he had been talking with God. Aaron and all the people of Israel saw Moses, and behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the leaders of the congregation returned to him, and Moses talked with them. Now, of course, they have just nearly escaped having God destroy them, his holiness, his glory, and so they might be a little timid about being around holiness. And here we are seeing that Moses is exuding that specialness, and there's something significant and different about him compared to them. Can they even come near him? Do they need to, if him representing God, his face is shining, do they need to back away from him? They're a little scared, like, should I even be around this guy? Am I going to die being even around him? This representative of God, and clearly the shining face showing them that he is genuinely representing God to them. And afterward, all the people of Israel came near, and he commanded them all that Yahweh had spoken with him in Mount Sinai. And so that's going to be, when he went up there. Remember, the first time he came down, it was immediately like damage control, like what's going on here. He may not have even had any opportunity to tell them all the things that God had said about the tabernacle. And then when he went back up, God further exposited more. He gave him kind of further instruction, and as the covenant was renewed. And so now he's got that to tell them as well. So he goes and explains that to them. And when Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil over his face. When Moses went in before Yahweh to speak with him, so this would be going into the tent of meeting, presumably, that was outside of the camp, he would remove the veil until he came out. And when he came out and told the people of Israel what he had commanded, the people of Israel would see the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face was shining, and Moses would put the veil over his face again until he went in to speak with him. So he essentially, what's going on, he goes to God, his face is uncovered, he's talking with God, and then he goes out, face still uncovered, gives them what God has said, and then covers his face. So he leaves that uncovered. This is him having the shining face is something of a stamp of approval by God, you could think. So they see that and they trust, he's the speaker, he's the one that God is communicating through. I'm going to listen to what he's saying right now. And then when he was done speaking, cover it up. And it seems like Paul is saying in the New Testament that the reason why he'd cover up his face is because now it would dwindle. He wouldn't keep having a shining face in perpetuity. It would kind of go back to normal after a while. So Paul seems to indicate that would be because that would cause a lack of faith. Oh, we're going to listen to him because he's got the shining face, the stamp of approval. Oh, it's gone now. Okay, I can just ignore it. Basically have a hardened heart, have a heart that rejects Moses and rejects God's person just because now his face is back to how it was, how it was when he saved them from Egypt. So this is something that shouldn't be the case, but that was, I guess, potentially the case. And so at this point, this is kind of a way of assisting the people in remaining faithful to cover his face. And Paul even uses this he furthers this analogy where he says that the Israelites, the Jews, they essentially have a veil over them as they read the Old Testament. They don't see clearly. They don't see the light, the truth that comes from the Old Testament, and that truth is Jesus. But Paul says that when we accept Jesus, when we follow him, we are Christians, that veil comes up. And we don't have our faces covered. We can see the light. So the veil, instead of being on Moses, it's talking about the veil being on us. We're not able to see clearly, but as we accept Jesus, things become more clear, and we can see the truth in the Old Testament. We can see how Jesus is proclaimed in the Old Testament. We know the truth that the Jews rejected, because they said, Jesus says, hey, it's about me. I'm the one that was supposed to come. I'm the seed of the woman. And they say, no thanks. We don't think so. And that's because, as Paul is saying, it's as if they have a veil covering their face when they're reading the Old Testament, like that they can't make sense of it. And so there's this light there, there's this truth there in the Old Testament, and they don't see it. So I think if that's what Paul says, that's what it is. And definitely very helpful, I know, for me personally, hopefully for you as well, because when I initially read this many years ago, I had no idea what I was looking at. Like, why is he covering his face and not covering his face, and what's going on? But then this is one of those really great times when we can actually look at the New Testament and say, can you please explain this to me? And the New Testament says, yes, in fact, I can. Let me break it down for you. Now, there's plenty of other passages that there's so much Old Testament. You look at the Old Testament versus the New Testament, the size difference there. The New Testament certainly doesn't address every single thing it possibly could, every single thing that talks about Jesus. But it is really wonderful when we get these parts of it where the New Testament does point to it and say, here's what this is talking about, so that we can be so sure, all right, well, then that's what it's talking about, because I think Jesus knew what he was talking about. I think the Apostle Paul, the Apostle Peter, I think they knew what they were talking about. They probably understand the Bible a little better than me or you or anyone else today. Jesus, he's, the one who basically wrote it. It's his word. And then Paul, Peter, they were taught by him. They were around when he was around. They probably know a thing or two. So it's exciting to be able to look at a passage, get confused, flip to the New Testament, read that, and say, oh, much less confusing. Thank you. So that's where we end this lesson today, talking about what was going on with Moses' face shining and having a veil, all of that, as he brought God's word to God's people after the covenant is renewed, just after they broke it. So we'll see you next time for our last lesson in Exodus, where we talk about actually chapters 35 all the way through 40. We got the tabernacle again, just like we had in 25 through 31, and we'll look at what that's all about at that time. Thank you for watching that video. I hope that it helped you learn a little bit more about the Bible today. And if you'd like to continue to learn more about the Bible, then we have plenty of other videos on the channel. And if this has been helpful for you, then you can always let me know by subscribing to the channel. And hopefully I'll be able to continue to help you learn even more about God's Word. Thanks.